My name is Maya Henderson. I'm 28 years old, and I just spent the last 2 years creating my graphic novel masterpiece, a 3-book fantasy series with over 800 illustrated pages, intricate character designs, and narrative complexity that represented the culmination of my entire creative career. Last Saturday at my parents' family party, I refused to give my father Kenneth $139,000 for his latest guaranteed success business venture, and he responded by picking up my laptop from the poolside table and casually dropping it into the deep end while announcing, "Oh, sorry, I accidentally dropped your laptop in the pool," with a smirk that made clear there was nothing accidental about destroying 2 years of my professional work. My mother Janice immediately added, "It's just an accident, Maya. These things happen," as if deliberately destroying someone's career work was comparable to spilling a drink, while 15 family members stood watching the laptop sink to the bottom without a single person objecting to the blatant lie about this being accidental. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even respond to Kenneth's obvious satisfaction with punishing me for refusing his financial demands. I simply stayed at the party for another hour, making mental notes about every single financial support system I had been quietly providing for years, then drove home and waited until midnight to begin systematically dismantling their comfortable lifestyle in ways that would teach them the difference between real accidents and deliberate consequences. I work as an independent graphic novelist and visual storyteller, creating original illustrated narrative works that blend sophisticated literary storytelling with cinematic visual art to produce books that have garnered critical acclaim, substantial commercial success, and a dedicated international readership. My annual income from graphic novel sales, licensing agreements, merchandise rights, and speaking engagements averages $185,000, with individual years reaching as high as $240,000 when new book releases align with successful licensing deals. The creative process for graphic novels is extraordinarily time-intensive and intellectually demanding, requiring me to function simultaneously as writer, illustrator, character designer, layout artist, and visual director for complex narrative works that typically contain 300 to 400 pages of integrated text and artwork. Each page requires 8 to 12 hours of work, including initial sketching, character refinement, background development, inking, digital coloring, lettering, and final composition, meaning a single graphic novel represents approximately 3,000 hours of focused creative labor. My breakthrough success came 5 years ago with Shadowlands Rising, a dark fantasy graphic novel featuring morally complex characters navigating political intrigue in a world where magic was dying and technology was emerging to replace it. The book received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Library Journal, won the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Novel, and sold over 75,000 copies in its first year. Extraordinary numbers for an independent graphic novel from a debut creator. The success of Shadowlands Rising established my reputation as a significant new voice in graphic storytelling, leading to publishing contracts for additional books, invitations to speak at major comic conventions and literary festivals, and licensing opportunities for merchandise, potential television adaptation, and international translations in 12 languages. But beyond commercial success and critical recognition, what I value most about my graphic novel career is the creative freedom to tell complex stories that blend visual artistry with narrative depth in ways that neither traditional novels nor mainstream comics typically achieve. My work explores themes of identity, power, transformation, and moral ambiguity through characters whose visual design reinforces their narrative complexity and whose story arcs require the integrated text and image format that graphic novels provide. The project Kenneth destroyed by throwing my laptop into the pool was my most ambitious work yet, a trilogy called The Meridian Cycle that would follow interconnected characters across 3 books, totaling over 800 illustrated pages. I had been working on this series for 2 years, creating detailed character designs for 47 major and supporting characters, developing intricate world building for 5 distinct cultures with unique visual aesthetics, writing and revising the complete narrative arc across all 3 volumes, and completing the full illustration work for the first book, plus substantial progress on the second volume. The laptop contained every working file, sketch, character design, layout, color palette, and narrative draft for the entire trilogy, representing approximately 5,000 hours of creative labor that couldn't be recreated simply by starting over, because the creative development process itself was iterative and cumulative, with each design decision building on previous explorations that existed only in those destroyed files. My father, Kenneth Henderson, is 60 years old and has spent his entire adult life cycling through failed business ventures, get-rich-quick schemes, and guaranteed opportunity investments that invariably lose money, while he blames external factors rather than accepting responsibility for poor planning, inadequate market research, and unrealistic expectations about business success. Kenneth's business history includes a failed restaurant that closed after 18 months due to poor location choice and his refusal to adapt the menu to actual customer preferences, a landscaping company that went bankrupt because he underbid every project and couldn't maintain positive cash flow, a used car sales venture that collapsed when he purchased vehicles with undisclosed mechanical problems, and various multi-level marketing schemes that cost him thousands in inventory he couldn't sell. Each business failure was accompanied by extensive family discussions about why this particular venture didn't work out, and elaborate plans for the next can't-miss opportunity that Kenneth was certain would finally make him wealthy. He approached business ventures with optimism, untempered by learning from previous failures, market analysis, or realistic assessment of his own capabilities and available resources. But what made Kenneth's business failures particularly frustrating for our family was his expectation that relatives should fund his ventures despite his documented track record of losing money on every enterprise he attempted. He would present each new business idea with elaborate projections about potential returns, minimize the risks and startup costs, and pressure family members to invest in opportunities that were really just subsidies for ventures that would predictably fail within 2 years. My mother, Janice Henderson, is 57 years old and has spent decades enabling Kenneth's business delusions by supporting his ventures emotionally and financially, making excuses for his failures, and pressuring family members to provide the funding that Kenneth couldn't obtain from legitimate investors or financial institutions who would properly evaluate his business plans. Janice works as an administrative coordinator at a mid-sized insurance company, earning approximately $58,000 annually, handling policy documentation, customer service coordination, and basic office management. Her income provides the household's financial stability since Kenneth's business ventures generate minimal reliable revenue, but she resents having to be the family's primary earner, while Kenneth pursues business dreams that never materialize into sustainable income. Her resentment manifests in passive-aggressive comments about how some people have stable careers while others are still trying to find their path, and in her enthusiastic support for Kenneth's expectations that I should fund his business ventures since my graphic novel career has been financially successful. But what neither Kenneth nor Janice seem to understand, or perhaps they understand perfectly well and simply choose to ignore, is that my creative career is actual legitimate professional work that generates substantial income through years of skill development, market understanding, and relentless creative labor. They treat my graphic novels as a hobby or a fortunate accident, rather than recognizing the professional expertise and sustained effort required to succeed in competitive creative industries. Kenneth has always been dismissive of creative careers generally, and my graphic novel work specifically, characterizing artistic professions as not real work because they don't involve physical labor or traditional business operations. He's made countless comments over the years about how I should get a real job with a steady paycheck instead of drawing pictures for a living, as if creating sophisticated illustrated narrative works was comparable to childhood doodling. "Anyone can draw pictures and make up stories," Kenneth said when I first announced my intention to pursue graphic novel creation professionally. "That's not a career. That's what children do for fun. You need to think about real employment that will provide financial security." His characterization of graphic novel creation as something anyone can draw revealed his complete ignorance about the specialized skills required for professional illustration, narrative construction, visual storytelling, page composition, and the business acumen necessary to succeed in publishing industries. But Kenneth's opinions were never informed by actual knowledge. They were reflections of his own insecurities about his business failures and his need to diminish others' success to protect his self-image. Janice's dismissal of my career was subtler but equally invalidating. She would describe my work to friends and relatives as, "Maya does some art projects," or "Maya writes and draws books," in tones that suggested casual hobbies rather than professional creative work, generating six-figure income and critical recognition. When my first graphic novel won the Eisner Award, essentially the Oscar of the comics and graphic novel industry, Janice's response was, "That's nice, dear," before changing the subject to Kenneth's latest business venture that was certainly about to take off any day now. Her inability to celebrate my professional achievements revealed that acknowledging my success would highlight Kenneth's failures, creating family dynamics she preferred to avoid by simply pretending my accomplishments weren't significant. But despite their dismissal of my creative career and their characterization of my work as illegitimate or unimportant, Kenneth and Janice had no hesitation about expecting me to provide substantial financial support for their household expenses and Kenneth's business ventures once my income exceeded their combined earnings. Have you ever had family members dismiss your professional success while simultaneously expecting you to fund their lifestyle with the income they characterize as unimportant? The financial support for my parents began gradually 5 years ago, when the success of Shadowlands Rising generated my first substantial royalty payments and licensing income. Kenneth approached me with a business investment opportunity that required $35,000 for equipment and inventory for a pressure washing and exterior cleaning service he was certain would generate enormous returns. I was hesitant to fund another Kenneth business venture given his documented history of failures, but he and Janice presented elaborate arguments about how this time was different, how he had learned from previous mistakes, how the market research showed genuine demand, and how my investment would generate returns that would benefit the entire family. Against my better judgment, I provided the $35,000 Kenneth requested, framing it as a loan with the understanding that he would repay the principal plus modest interest once the business became profitable. Kenneth's pressure washing venture followed the predictable pattern of his previous failures: initial enthusiasm and optimistic projections, gradual recognition that he had underestimated costs and overestimated revenue potential, increasing financial stress as expenses exceeded income, and eventual closure after 18 months with substantial losses and zero repayment of my loan. But instead of acknowledging the business failure and his inability to repay my loan, Kenneth reframed the situation as my investment in family support rather than a loan requiring repayment, suggesting that I shouldn't expect to get my money back because family helps family during difficult times without keeping score about financial transactions. His recharacterization of my loan as a gift relieved him of repayment obligations, while establishing a precedent that my income was available for family use without reciprocal obligations on their part. The expectation that I should provide financial support without expecting repayment or even acknowledgement became the new family dynamic that would persist and expand over the following years. Beyond the failed business loan, I had gradually assumed responsibility for various ongoing household expenses that Kenneth and Janice struggled to cover on their limited income. I was paying their car insurance premiums of $320 monthly because they claimed their budget couldn't accommodate the expense. I was covering their internet and cable television service costing $215 monthly because they needed premium channels and high-speed internet, despite their income level, suggesting more modest entertainment spending would be appropriate. I was paying for multiple streaming service subscriptions totaling approximately $85 monthly because they wanted access to every major platform without prioritizing which services actually provided value. I was covering their cell phone family plan at $160 monthly, despite the fact that both parents had smartphones with data plans that exceeded what their actual usage patterns required. Most significantly, I had taken over their mortgage payments 18 months ago, when Kenneth's latest business venture generated insufficient income to cover their housing costs. The mortgage was $2,400 monthly, representing by far my largest ongoing family financial obligation, and the one that would create immediate crisis if I stopped paying. The total amount I was contributing monthly to Kenneth and Janice's household expenses was approximately $3,300, nearly $40,000 annually that I was providing to parents who simultaneously dismissed my career as illegitimate while depending entirely on its income to maintain their lifestyle. But beyond the direct financial support, what made the dynamic particularly galling was their complete lack of gratitude, acknowledgement, or even basic recognition that I was substantially subsidizing their comfortable existence. They never thanked me for paying their mortgage, never expressed appreciation for covering their insurance or entertainment expenses, never acknowledged that my hobby career was generating the income that prevented their foreclosure and maintained services they enjoyed daily. Instead, they continued treating me as the family member who had made questionable career choices and should be pressured to provide additional support whenever Kenneth identified new investment opportunities that required funding he couldn't obtain through legitimate channels. The pattern continued last month when Kenneth announced his latest business venture, a franchise opportunity for a specialty coffee kiosk that he was certain would generate passive income through minimal effort once the initial setup was complete. The franchise required an initial investment of $139,000, including franchise fees, equipment costs, initial inventory, and working capital to cover operating expenses during the startup period. Kenneth presented the coffee kiosk franchise to me as a can't-miss opportunity that would finally provide the business success he had been seeking throughout his failed entrepreneurial career. He had elaborate spreadsheets showing projected revenue based on foot traffic estimates, profit margins on coffee and pastry sales, and optimistic scenarios where the kiosk would generate $50,000 annually in passive income that would accumulate while he did minimal daily work. But his financial projections ignored fundamental realities about franchise businesses. That franchise agreements typically include ongoing royalty payments and advertising fees that reduce profit margins. That specialty coffee kiosks face intense competition from established chains like Starbucks. That foot traffic estimates are notoriously unreliable. And that passive income from food service operations is largely a fantasy given the daily management requirements for inventory, staffing, equipment maintenance, and customer service. More importantly, Kenneth's request that I fund his coffee kiosk franchise ignored his consistent pattern of business failures and his complete lack of experience in food service, franchise operations, or the specialty coffee industry. He was asking me to provide $139,000, more than 3 times what I had lost on his previous failed pressure washing venture, for a business concept he hadn't researched adequately and wouldn't be capable of operating successfully even if the market opportunity was genuine. My refusal to fund Kenneth's coffee kiosk franchise was immediate and absolute. No, I'm not giving you $139,000 for another business venture that will fail within 2 years like all your previous businesses. Kenneth's response to my refusal revealed that he had expected automatic approval for his funding request and viewed my declining as betrayal rather than reasonable decision-making based on his documented track record of business failures. "You make plenty of money from your art books," he said with obvious resentment. $139,000 is nothing to you, but it's life-changing for me. Family is supposed to help family achieve their dreams, not hoard wealth while others struggle. His characterization of my reluctance to fund his guaranteed-to-fail business venture as hoarding wealth while others struggle ignored the fact that I was already providing $40,000 annually toward their household expenses and had lost $35,000 on his previous business loan. But Kenneth's sense of entitlement to my income was so profound that declining any request was treated as selfish betrayal of family obligations. The conversation about the coffee kiosk franchise became increasingly heated as Kenneth and Janice pressured me to reconsider my refusal, with Janice adding that I owed Kenneth support after all the years he had provided for the family during my childhood. As if normal parental responsibilities for minor children created perpetual financial obligations for adult children to fund their parents' failed business ventures. When I continued refusing despite their escalating pressure tactics, Kenneth's demeanor shifted from persuasive arguments to obvious anger and thinly veiled threats about consequences for refusing to support family members who were trying to build something meaningful. The tension around Kenneth's funding request had been simmering for 3 weeks when they invited me to their annual summer party, a gathering they hosted every year with extended family members, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and various relatives who would gather for food, swimming, and general socializing around their backyard pool. I attended the party despite the recent tension about Kenneth's funding request, bringing my laptop because I had planned to leave early to work on deadline illustrations for the second volume of The Meridian Cycle that my publisher was expecting within 2 months. The laptop sat on a poolside table next to my towel and water bottle while I socialized with relatives, made small talk about family news, and tried to enjoy the party despite Kenneth's obvious coldness toward me since my refusal to fund his coffee kiosk franchise. About 2 hours into the party, Kenneth approached me near the pool where I was talking with my cousin about recent graphic novel releases and industry trends. His expression was smug and aggressive in ways that made clear he was about to say or do something deliberately provocative. "Maya, I've been thinking more about that franchise opportunity," Kenneth said loudly enough that nearby family members stopped their conversations to listen. "I really need you to reconsider refusing to support this venture. It's a guaranteed success, and you're being selfish by withholding funding that would barely impact your finances." His public pressure tactic was clearly designed to use social dynamics and family witness presence to guilt me into agreeing to his request, but I wasn't going to change my position regardless of audience. "Kenneth, I already told you I'm not funding another failed business venture," I said firmly. "You've lost money on every business you've attempted, and I'm not giving you $139,000 to repeat that pattern." My direct statement about his business failures in front of extended family apparently crossed a line that Kenneth considered unacceptable, despite the fact that every relative present was aware of his entrepreneurial track record. His face reddened with rage, and his eyes shifted to my laptop sitting on the nearby table. Have you ever seen someone's expression change when they decide to deliberately destroy something you care about as punishment for refusing their demands? What happened next occurred so quickly that I barely had time to process the action before it was complete. Kenneth crossed the 3 steps to the poolside table, picked up my laptop, which he knew contained 2 years of work on my graphic novel trilogy, and casually threw it into the deep end of the pool, where it sank immediately to the bottom, 8 feet underwater. "Oh, sorry," Kenneth said with a smirk that made absolutely clear there was nothing sorry about his action. "I accidentally dropped your laptop in the pool." "Oops, just an accident." The emphasis on accident while smirking revealed his satisfaction with destroying my professional work as punishment for refusing to fund his business venture. He was openly enjoying having hurt me in retaliation for my declining his financial demands. Janice immediately rushed to support Kenneth's characterization of the laptop destruction as accidental, rather than condemning his obvious act of deliberate sabotage. "It's just an accident, Maya," she said in a tone suggesting I would be unreasonable to be upset about watching 2 years of work deliberately destroyed. "These things happen. You should back things up better." Her suggestion that I should back things up better implied that Kenneth's deliberate destruction of my laptop was somehow my fault for not adequately protecting my work from family members who might throw it into pools during arguments about refusing to fund their business ventures. I looked around at the 15 family members who had witnessed Kenneth deliberately destroying my laptop while claiming it was an accident, waiting for someone to object to the obvious lie, defend me, or at least acknowledge that what had just happened was completely unacceptable regardless of any disagreements about business funding. But every single relative stood silent, avoiding eye contact, apparently unwilling to contradict Kenneth's accident narrative or defend me against retaliation for refusing his financial demands. Their silence communicated that they either believed I deserved this punishment for refusing to fund Kenneth's franchise, or were too cowardly to challenge his behavior even when it involved obviously deliberate destruction of someone's professional work. The laptop sitting at the bottom of the pool contained working files for my entire Meridian Cycle trilogy, 800 pages of completed and in-progress illustrations representing 5,000 hours of creative labor and 2 years of my professional life. Even if the hardware could somehow be salvaged, the water damage would have destroyed the hard drive, corrupting all the digital files that existed only on that device. Kenneth and Janice's expectation that I would simply accept their accident characterization and move on without consequences for deliberately destroying my career work revealed how little they valued my professional achievements and how profoundly they misunderstood the nature of creative labor. But I didn't scream at Kenneth or argue about whether his laptop destruction was accidental. I didn't cry or demand he retrieve the laptop from the pool. I didn't appeal to Janice for support or ask the silent relatives to confirm what they had witnessed. I simply stood there absorbing the reality that my father had deliberately destroyed 2 years of my work to punish me for refusing to give him money, and my family was supporting his action by calling it an accident while smirking at my pain. After standing silent for nearly a minute while processing what had happened, I calmly gathered my towel and car keys, said goodbye to no one, and walked out of the party while Kenneth and Janice watched me leave without apology or acknowledgement that they had done anything inappropriate by destroying my professional work. I drove home in a state of cold fury, not about the destroyed laptop itself. I'm not careless with backups, and most of my critical work files were safely stored in cloud systems, but about the deliberate cruelty of destroying my work to punish me for refusing financial demands, and the family's collective decision to characterize obvious retaliation as an accident while expecting me to accept their narrative without consequences. By the time I reached my apartment, I had decided that people who find destroying your life's work funny while living off your income need to experience their own accidents, involving things they actually care about, like the comfortable lifestyle they had been maintaining entirely on the income from my supposedly meaningless hobby career. I spent the evening working from my cloud backups, confirming that all my critical project files were intact and that Kenneth's laptop destruction had caused professional inconvenience, but not actual loss of my creative work. The realization that my files were safe transformed my anger from panic about lost work into cold determination to teach Kenneth and Janice exactly what accidents feel like when they're not really accidents at all. At midnight, when I was certain Kenneth and Janice would be asleep and unable to immediately respond to reverse my actions, I began systematically dismantling every financial support system I had been quietly providing for years without their acknowledgement or appreciation. The first action was canceling the automatic mortgage payment scheduled to process in 5 days. I logged into my banking system, navigated to scheduled transfers, and deleted the $2,400 monthly payment that had been preventing their foreclosure for 18 months. The cancellation would result in their mortgage payment bouncing when the bank attempted to draft funds from their account that no longer had my supplementary transfers maintaining adequate balance. The second action was removing myself from their car insurance policy, where I had been listed as a paying party covering their $320 monthly premiums. I called the insurance company's 24-hour customer service line, explained that I was no longer financially responsible for these policies, and requested immediate removal from all payment obligations. The insurance representative processed my request within minutes, leaving Kenneth and Janice as sole policyholders responsible for premiums they couldn't afford on their limited income. The third action was canceling all the streaming service subscriptions I had been paying for: Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, and Paramount Plus, totaling $85 monthly, that provided the entertainment they enjoyed daily without ever acknowledging who was funding it. Each service cancellation generated automated confirmation emails that I saved as documentation of my withdrawal from their financial support systems. The fourth action was terminating their internet and cable television service by calling the provider and explaining that I was the account holder but would no longer be maintaining service at their address. The provider scheduled disconnection for 72 hours later, giving Kenneth and Janice just enough time to discover their entertainment, and internet access was disappearing before they could intervene to establish their own service. The fifth action was removing myself from their cell phone family plan, where I had been paying $160 monthly for their smartphone service. I contacted the wireless provider, split their lines onto a separate account under their names, and ensured they would receive their own billing starting immediately for services they would need to pay themselves or lose. The sixth and most impactful action was contacting their mortgage company to clarify that I was not a co-borrower, had no legal obligation for their loan, and should not be contacted about their account status or payment issues. I wanted to ensure the mortgage company understood that any upcoming payment problems were Kenneth and Janice's sole responsibility, and that I would not be intervening to prevent foreclosure proceedings. The comprehensive financial separation took approximately 3 hours of late-night phone calls, online account changes, and documentation of every support system I had been maintaining. By 3 a.m., I had successfully removed myself from every financial obligation, automatic payment, and service subscription that had been supporting Kenneth and Janice's lifestyle. Before going to bed, I printed a simple note that I would mail to their address. Oops, looks like I accidentally canceled some things. Just a small mistake. These things happen. You should plan better. The note echoed their dismissive characterization of Kenneth's deliberate destruction of my laptop, making clear that my financial withdrawal was equally deliberate, and that calling it a mistake was exactly as dishonest as calling his laptop destruction an accident. Have you ever felt the satisfaction of removing financial support from people who dismissed your work while depending entirely on the income it generated? The consequences of my financial withdrawal began manifesting within 48 hours, when the first automatic payments I had canceled were declined, and services that Kenneth and Janice had taken for granted started generating disconnection notices and overdue payment warnings. The internet and cable service was disconnected exactly 72 hours after my cancellation, cutting off their entertainment and internet access in the middle of the day when they had been expecting normal service. The sudden loss of connectivity apparently prompted them to contact the service provider, who explained that the account holder had terminated service and that they would need to establish their own account if they wanted to restore access. But establishing new service required credit checks, installation fees, security deposits, and first month's payment in advance, costs totaling approximately $500 that Kenneth and Janice couldn't immediately cover, leaving them without internet or cable television while they scrambled to arrange funding. The streaming service cancellations became apparent when Kenneth attempted to watch his evening television programs and discovered that Netflix, HBO Max, and his other preferred services were no longer accessible. The service cancellation screens prompted him to enter payment information to restore access, revealing that someone had terminated all the subscriptions he had been using daily without ever considering who was paying for them. The cell phone service disruption occurred when their smartphones stopped making calls and showed messages about suspended service due to unpaid balances. The wireless provider had transferred their lines to a separate account with immediate billing rather than waiting for the end of the billing cycle, creating an unexpected $400 charge that needed to be paid immediately to restore service. But the most serious consequence arrived on the 5th day after my financial withdrawal, when Kenneth and Janice's mortgage payment bounced due to insufficient funds in their account. The mortgage company sent automated notification that their payment had been declined, that they needed to provide alternative payment within 5 business days to avoid late fees and penalties, and that continued payment failures would result in foreclosure proceedings. The bounced mortgage payment apparently triggered panic that exceeded their frustration about losing internet, streaming services, and cell phone connectivity. Foreclosure threats create existential housing crisis that Kenneth and Janice couldn't resolve simply by complaining about service disruptions or inconvenient credit card declines. According to information I later received from my cousin who maintained contact with both sides of the family conflict, Kenneth and Janice spent the day after their mortgage payment bounced, making increasingly desperate phone calls to bank representatives, trying to understand why the payment had failed and whether they could somehow reverse the insufficient funds situation before the 5-day grace period expired. The bank's explanation, that no funds had been transferred to their account from the supplemental source that had been covering their mortgage for the past 18 months, apparently confused them initially before they realized that I must have canceled the automatic payment that had been preventing exactly this foreclosure crisis. Kenneth's immediate response was attempting to call me to demand explanation and presumably insist that I immediately restore the mortgage payment to prevent foreclosure. But he discovered that I had blocked his number along with Janice's, making it impossible for them to reach me directly through the phone contact they had always used. Their subsequent attempts to reach me through email, social media messaging, and contact through mutual relatives all received the same response: automated messages indicating that I was unavailable and would respond to inquiries at my convenience, which translated to never responding at all to people who had destroyed my work and called it an accident. By the morning of the 6th day after my financial withdrawal, my blocked phone showed 37 missed call attempts from Kenneth's number, 42 from Janice's number, and 63 text messages that I couldn't read, but whose preview line suggested a progression from confusion to anger to eventual panic about their deteriorating financial situation. The most revealing message was a single text from Kenneth that simply said, "Please," in capital letters with no additional context, apparently his version of begging for restoration of financial support, without actually apologizing for destroying my laptop or acknowledging that characterizing deliberate destruction as an accident had been dishonest retaliation for my refusing his business funding request. I didn't respond to Kenneth's desperate plea. I didn't explain my actions or defend my decision to stop funding people who destroyed my work. I didn't engage with their panic about foreclosure or their sudden realization that the daughter whose career they dismissed as meaningless had been providing every element of their comfortable lifestyle. Instead, I continued working on my Meridian Cycle trilogy from my cloud backups, making excellent progress on illustrations for the second volume while experiencing zero guilt about Kenneth and Janice's self-created crisis. They had chosen to destroy my work to punish me for refusing financial demands, and now they were experiencing the natural consequences of attacking someone who had been subsidizing their entire existence. 1 week after my financial withdrawal, I received a voicemail from Janice. Apparently, she had tried calling from a different number that I hadn't blocked yet. Her message was a masterpiece of attempted manipulation that avoided any genuine apology while trying to guilt me into restoring financial support. "Maya, honey, we need to talk about this misunderstanding," Janice said in the voicemail, her tone suggesting injured innocence rather than acknowledging any wrongdoing. "Your father's accident with the laptop was unfortunate, but you're overreacting by cutting off all support for the family. We could lose our house because of your angry reaction to an accident. Please call us back so we can resolve this situation before things get worse." Her characterization of Kenneth's deliberate laptop destruction as an accident and her suggestion that I was overreacting revealed that even facing foreclosure, they still couldn't acknowledge the truth about what Kenneth had done or accept responsibility for deliberately destroying my professional work as punishment for refusing his demands. I responded to Janice's voicemail with a single text message before blocking the new number she had used. "Not an accident. You destroyed 2 years of my work on purpose and called it accidental. Now you're experiencing consequences that are equally deliberate. Enjoy discovering what real accidents feel like." The message made clear that I understood Kenneth's laptop destruction had been retaliation rather than accident, that I had deliberately withdrawn financial support as consequences for their behavior, and that characterizing my actions as accidents would be exactly as dishonest as their original accident narrative about the laptop. 2 weeks after my financial withdrawal, I learned through family contacts that Kenneth and Janice were facing multiple serious financial crises beyond just the bounced mortgage payment. Their car insurance had been canceled when they couldn't pay the premiums I had been covering, making it illegal for them to drive their vehicles and potentially exposing them to significant liability if they drove without coverage and were involved in accidents. Their credit card, the one I had been paying monthly balances on without their knowledge, had been frozen due to non-payment, leaving them without access to credit they had been using for groceries, gas, household expenses, and general lifestyle spending they couldn't afford on their actual income. The mortgage company had sent formal notice of default after their second missed payment. initiating foreclosure proceedings that would result in their house being sold at auction unless they could immediately pay all overdue amounts, plus substantial penalties and fees. The comprehensive financial collapse they were experiencing was teaching them exactly what their comfortable lifestyle had actually cost and who had been providing the resources that maintained that lifestyle despite their inadequate income and Kenneth's failed business ventures. 3 weeks after my financial withdrawal, Kenneth and Janice apparently convinced one of my cousins to host a family meeting where they could attempt to pressure me into restoring financial support through collective family appeals and social pressure tactics. I declined to attend the family meeting, explaining to my cousin that I had no interest in being lectured by people who had destroyed my work, called it an accident, and expected me to continue funding their lifestyle despite their deliberate attack on my professional achievements. According to my cousin's report after the meeting, Kenneth and Janice had presented themselves as victims of my cruel overreaction to an unfortunate accident, claiming that I was destroying the family over a laptop that could be replaced when the real issue was my stubbornness about lending Kenneth money for legitimate business opportunities. Their characterization of the situation apparently persuaded some family members that I was being unreasonable, but several relatives who had witnessed the actual laptop destruction at the party spoke up to clarify that Kenneth's action had looked completely deliberate and that his "oops, just an accident" comment while smirking had made clear he was enjoying punishing me for refusing his demands. The witnesses' testimony about what they had actually seen contradicted Kenneth and Janice's victim narrative, creating family division about whether I was justified in withdrawing support or whether I should forgive the accident and resume funding their household expenses despite their attack on my professional work. But I wasn't interested in family consensus about whether my response was proportionate to Kenneth's offense. The people who destroyed my work while living off my income had revealed their true character, and no amount of family pressure would convince me to resume supporting them financially. Have you ever refused to participate in family meetings designed to pressure you into forgiving people who haven't actually apologized for attacking you? 1 month after my financial withdrawal, Kenneth and Janice's financial situation had deteriorated to crisis levels that finally forced them to make genuine changes, rather than simply waiting for me to relent and restore their comfortable lifestyle. They had borrowed money from Janice's sister to make their mortgage payments and avoid immediate foreclosure, though the loans came with expectations for rapid repayment that they had no realistic way to fulfill. They had sold one of their cars to generate cash for immediate expenses, reducing their transportation options, but eliminating one car payment and insurance premium they couldn't afford. They had canceled their expensive cable television package and downgraded to basic internet service, substantially reducing their entertainment spending while forcing them to adjust to more modest lifestyle expectations. They had eliminated dining out, luxury purchases, and general discretionary spending that had been possible when I was covering their basic housing and insurance costs. Most significantly, Kenneth had finally accepted that his entrepreneurial dreams were never going to materialize into sustainable business success, and had begun seeking regular employment in industries where his skills might be valued, despite his age and lack of recent experience. The forced recognition that he needed to earn income through traditional employment rather than through can't-miss business opportunities represented psychological surrender to realities he had been avoiding for decades. Janice had increased her work hours and begun seeking higher-paying administrative positions that would provide more income than her current job offered. The necessity of actually earning enough to cover their household expenses without supplemental support was forcing her to prioritize income over comfort in ways she had avoided when my contributions made their inadequate earnings sufficient. Their forced lifestyle changes and employment adjustments represented the reality they should have accepted years ago, when Kenneth's businesses first started failing, that their income was inadequate to support their lifestyle preferences, and that pretending otherwise by depending on others' financial support was unsustainable long-term. But what made their situation particularly satisfying from my perspective was the growing awareness among extended family members that Kenneth and Janice's comfortable lifestyle during years of unemployment and failed business ventures had been entirely funded by the daughter whose career they dismissed as a meaningless hobby. Relatives who learned about my role in preventing their foreclosure and maintaining their services while they mocked my art books, and drawing pictures for a living, began questioning Kenneth and Janice's credibility about business expertise and their judgment in destroying the laptop of someone who had been supporting them financially. Wait, Maya was paying your mortgage and insurance while you were calling her career worthless? One of Kenneth's brothers asked when learning about our family conflict. And then you destroyed her computer when she wouldn't give you more money for another business? That seems insane. The blunt assessment that Kenneth's behavior had been insane reflected the perspective of people who understood that deliberately destroying someone's professional work while depending on their income represented profound dysfunction rather than justifiable response to refused business funding. 6 months after my financial withdrawal, I had fully recovered from Kenneth's laptop destruction. Not because losing the physical device hadn't been professionally disruptive, but because my cloud backup systems meant that none of my actual creative work had been permanently lost, despite his attempt to destroy 2 years of my professional progress. I completed the first volume of the Meridian Cycle and submitted it to my publisher ahead of schedule, generating advance praise from reviewers who received early copies and building anticipation for the trilogy's release. The book received starred reviews, won an Eisner Award nomination, and pre-orders exceeded my previous releases by 40%, validating that my career was thriving despite Kenneth's attempt to damage my professional progress. The success of my work provided the most satisfying response to Kenneth's dismissal of my creative career as meaningless hobby, objective evidence that my graphic novels generated substantial income, critical recognition, and commercial success that contradicted his characterization of my profession as drawing pictures for a living. But beyond professional success, the most meaningful outcome of that devastating laptop destruction was the clarity it provided about family relationships and the importance of refusing to enable people who attack you while depending on your support. Kenneth and Janice had revealed their true character when Kenneth deliberately destroyed my work to punish me for refusing his demands, then lied about it being an accident while Janice supported his dishonest narrative. Their subsequent attempts to pressure me into resuming financial support through family manipulation and guilt tactics only reinforced that they viewed me as a resource to be exploited, rather than a daughter whose achievements deserved respect. Some family relationships are fundamentally built on exploitation disguised as mutual support, where one party provides everything while the other party consumes resources while disparaging their source. The only healthy response when such dynamics become clear is complete separation, rather than continued enabling of people who have proven they will attack you if you refuse their demands. 2 years after walking out of that family party where Kenneth destroyed my laptop while calling it an accident, I continue thriving professionally and personally in a life completely separate from parents who learned too late that destroying someone's work while living off their income triggers consequences that last far longer than the temporary satisfaction of petty revenge. My graphic novel trilogy became a best-selling series with television adaptation rights, selling to a major streaming service for substantial payment, critical recognition continuing through industry awards and positive reviews, and my reputation as an important voice in graphic storytelling firmly established. The career that Kenneth dismissed as meaningless generated wealth, recognition, and professional satisfaction that far exceeded his failed business ventures and validated my choices despite his contempt. The woman who once worked 65-hour weeks creating illustrated narratives while funding parents who mocked her tree-hugger job had learned that being called useless by people who destroy your professional work as punishment deserves the ultimate response: removing yourself and your income from their lives and letting them discover what actual uselessness looks like when foreclosure notices arrive and services get disconnected. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments whether you've ever had family members destroy something important to you, then call it an accident while expecting you to continue supporting them financially. Have you experienced situations where people dismissed your professional work while depending entirely on the income it generated, then attacked you for refusing additional support? Your experiences might help someone else who's dealing with family members whose entitlement has reached the point where they'll sabotage your work rather than accept boundaries about financial support. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that people who destroy your professional work as punishment while calling it an accident don't deserve the income that work generates. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for delusional people is remove your support and let them experience natural consequences of attacking someone who was preventing their financial collapse. See you in our next story here on Sweet Revenge Diaries.